Tank Valves and Out-of-Air Emergencies by Peter de Noble. Out-of-air situations are the most common cause of fatal diving accidents. Surprisingly, these problems sometimes occur at the very beginning of dives when divers should still have a full tank of compressed gas. How is this possible? Recently, such a case was reported through DAN's Diving Incident Report System, or DIRS. The following is a brief summary of the case. A few minutes into the dive, while still descending, the diver dropped his weights and surfaced in a hurry. The dive guide surfaced next to him and found the individual at the surface, panicking and out of his buoyancy compensating device. The diver's BCD was empty of gas and could not be inflated. His tank appeared to have no pressure. The guide inflated the BC orally and calmed the victim down. The guide then checked the valve of the victim's tank and found it closed. He opened the valve and found the pressure of the tank to be 200 bar. The victim said that a few minutes into the dive, as he descended to 10 meters, he suddenly had no air. He never explained why he got out of his BCD or whether he himself closed the tank. In this situation, the diver most likely did not sufficiently open the tank valve before descending. The tank was open enough to provide some air at the surface and in shallow water, but as the diver descended, he did not get enough. He tried to open the tank, but in an attempt to do so, probably turned the valve in the wrong direction, shutting it off completely. The root cause of this incident may have been the often suggested practice of opening a valve all the way and then turning it half a turn back. To learn about the prevalence of this practice and the rationale behind it, we conducted an informal survey using Facebook and a group of diver medics. The survey questions were as follows. 1. How do you open your tank valve? And 2. Why are there so many incidents involving incompletely open tank valves? We received 40 responses. In general, there were two distinctive answers to the first question. All the way, and all the way, and then half a turn, or in some cases a quarter turn, back. Nearly every respondent had his or her own justification for doing it that way. The second question elicited long and various answers. We then contacted two experts, both experienced divers and scholars in matters of diving accidents, and asked them for their insights. The question was asked as follows. How might an incompletely opened valve leave a diver without a gas supply? According to Peter Buzakot, the breathing gas is delivered from the tank to the diver through a valve, then a first stage regulator, then a hose, and then a second stage regulator. The degree to which the valve is open can be important depending on the valve type, and it may vary amongst individual valves of the same type. Even valves of the same brand vary in the number of degrees the knob has to be turned before the volume of gas meets or exceeds the diver's needs. A gauge is connected to the tank immediately after the valve to measure pressure in the tank. Next in the gas line is the first stage regulator, which fills the hose to about 10 to 20 bar higher than ambient pressure. Last is the second stage. When a diver inhales, the pressure in the breathing line drops and the regulator allows more gas to flow out of the tank. If the tank valve is not fully open, then a diver will suck the available gas out of the line faster than the gas can flow back into it from the tank. In that case, one can see the needle of the gauge move with each attempted breath. Recreational divers' average breathing rate over the duration of a dive varies from 7 to 45 liters per minute. This depends on the size of the diver, how stressed he or she is, and how hard they are exercising. For a ventilation of 45 liters per minute, a diver may breathe at a rate of 30 times per minute, giving them 1 second for inhalation and 1 second for exhalation of a tidal volume of 1.5 liters. This means that the regulator then has to deliver 1.5 liters in 1 second. However, the deeper a diver is, the more molecules of gas are necessary to make up that same volume, and the more molecules must pass through the valve and the rest of the gas line into the lungs. Remember that the pressure at the surface is 1 atmosphere, and it increases by a further atmosphere every 10 meters of depth. If a diver is breathing 20 liters at the surface, he will need 40 liters at 10 meters and 60 liters at 20 meters. A partly closed valve may provide sufficient gas to a resting diver at the surface, but at depth or during exercise, the supply may not meet the demand. At this point, there is often a moment of disbelief, whereupon the diver asks themselves, "Did I just run out of gas?" They may then take another breath and initially think, "Oh wow, no problem." But then it stops short again. And if this happens, what are the options? Well, first and most important is to signal to your buddy that something is wrong, the twisting hand signal, and then tapping the regulator. This happened to a buddy of mine at 20 meters on an artificial reef in the Indian Ocean. I gave the diver in need my spare regulator. We kneeled on the bottom together while I checked his valve and turned it all the way on. He was able to go back onto his own regulator, and we continued a great dive. So you just need to keep a cool head. My buddy had been diving with me for 30 years and was pretty relaxed underwater. He was able to breathe slowly and stopped exercising and signaled to me. Here are Gareth Locke's comments. An open pillar valve may leave a diver without a gas supply because an inadequately open valve may deliver insufficient gas for the ambient pressure. A small opening that provides sufficient gas flow on the surface may become problematic with increasing depth due to gas density limiting the flow through the restriction. Despite the diver's increased breathing effort to suck more gas, the flow does not increase and the diver remains short of breath, accumulating carbon dioxide and possibly panicking. The second question: what might cause a valve to be incompletely open? First, the following comments from Gareth Locke. There are several reasons why a valve may not be open completely. They include failure to open it when entering the water, which might be the result of not opening the valve in the first place, or an interrupted equipment check that wasn't restarted properly. It is also possible that the diver opened the valve before entering the water and someone else closed it in an attempt to be helpful, thinking that they were opening it. Finally, the internal components of the valve may fail in the closed position. Peter Buzakod adds to this: the main cause, in my opinion, is turning of a valve halfway back. Divers and dive masters check each tank, and there's room for confusion about whether a tank is half on or half off. In the early days of scuba, valves were made of brass. So if you did not turn the knob back half a turn, the valve would shrink during the dive due to cooling, and you wouldn't be able to turn it off afterwards. This is not a problem today, but the old habits still die hard, and many divers turn the valve half a turn back. Problems may arise when a diver opens the valve fully and then turns it half a turn back, and then later someone else turns it the other way. Problems may arise when a diver opens the valve fully and then turns it half a turn back, and someone else also turns it back another half turn at a later stage. Labeling could help to prevent this. Some valve manufacturers now label their valve knobs with arrows indicating the words on and off at either end. This is a brilliant idea. You simply look at the knob and you immediately know which way to turn it. Not all manufacturers have done this yet, and not all valve knobs turn the same way. We live on the thin skin of a very large globe, and while the market may be global, each region has its own idiosyncrasies. In France, for example, divers commonly dive with Y valves, and in other places, side mount units feature right and left valves. So the international diving community should consider a uniform practice to optimize safety. What is the best practice to avoid confusion about whether a valve is open or closed? First, Peter Buzzacott. Always open your tank valve all the way. You don't need to turn the knob back a bit anymore. Those days are gone. Open it up and breathe easy. Also, a quick pre-dive check and a buddy check should pick up any errors. Look at the submersible pressure gauge, the SPG. Take a couple of breaths, and if you can breathe and the needle does not move, you're good to go. Gareth Locke. Well, first remember that you don't have gills and that you need a gas supply to breathe underwater. While that might appear to be a trite answer, it means that you have to accept personal responsibility for all your pre-dive equipment checks and preparation. You are the one who needs the gas, and therefore you should be the one to check it. The last time you can check it is after you get off the bench, seat, or beach just before entering the water. So, before you leave the kitting up place, reach back and check that the valve is open. If you can't reach it, ask someone else, preferably your buddy, to physically open the valve and then back off a little. Breathe the regulator enough to empty the low pressure hose and confirm the SPG needle did not drop. By checking it just before you enter the water, you reduce the possibility of a helpful deckhand introducing an error. Always think through the consequences of not completing this valve check. Starting a dive with a cylinder turned off could have a fatal outcome, as a recent fatality in the UK sadly confirmed. I believe the reason people don't check their valves and other life support equipment before they get into the water is because nothing went wrong the previous time and so it should be okay this time. This heuristic works well sometimes, but activities that involve life support equipment are not a place to gamble. Physical checklists help reduce the probability of an action not being completed, and conducting a proper buddy check in which the divers physically see each other throughout the activity further reduces the probability of omissions and failures. This advice applies to instructors and dive masters too. Holding a supervisory position doesn't exempt anyone from forgetting something. Furthermore, students and guided divers look to dive leaders as exemplars of best practices. If the leaders do not complete checks, they don't either. Finally, leaders must be able to help the divers that they are with, and they may not be able to do so without having a fully open pillar valve themselves.